As I said, this is the first meeting about Rav Kook. In my eyes, Rav Kook was, well, I'm not going to put order, let's say, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, one of the most important Orthodox thinkers of the 20th century. I don't like giving ratings to people. And when you live in the United States, when people say Harav, they're talking to Rabbi Soloveitchik. They're from the areas connected to Yeshiva University. In Israel, people who are connected to religious Zionism, when they say Harav, they mean Rav Kook. But every manhig has their community and has their important influence on the Jewish people, and it's not enough to have one. In our tradition, as you know, we have Shivat HaRo'im, the 7 shepherds. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aharon, Joseph, Yosef, David. It's called the 7 shepherds. You can't just have one. You need many because there are lots of people. In every generation you do. You also need. It says, Yiftach bedoro, Kishmuel bedoro. Everybody has their leader in their generation. And the leaders are based on both on the merit of the people and sometimes the needs of the people. It can be both. Rav Kook was born in Griva. If you want to look just for a moment on Wikipedia, I can show you some things here. Let's see this right here, right now. You'll see it. So he was born in 1865 in Latvia, in the city called Riga. That time was with Lithuania because the empire was called Lithuania at that time, but it was the area today of Latvia. His father of Shlomo Zalman Cohen Kook was a student of the Volozhin Yeshiva. So is he. I don't know why they did that right now. His mother was descended from Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Tzemach Tzedek. There are 2 Menachem Mendel Schneersons. Tzemach Tzedek, one of the Lubavitcher Rebbes, who writes quite a bit, actually. His books, Derech Mitzvotecha, on the meaning of the mitzvot, etc. Rav Kook himself studies at the age of 18 at the Volozhin Yeshiva. The Volozhin Yeshiva is a yeshiva founded by Yochaim Volozhin in 1802 in Volozhin. At that time, it was in Lithuania. Today, it's Belarus. And became close to the Rosh Yeshiva at the time, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berliner, who is known as the Netziv. He's also the last Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, because when the Russian government decides to impose upon the Volozhin Yeshiva the necessity to study the Russian language in the yeshiva, I don't know if there was other things aside from that, if it was also Russian literature, but definitely the Russian language. So the Netziv closed the yeshiva. Closed the yeshiva rather than the government starting to tamper with its way of studying. Rav Kook studied under Rabbi Rabinovich Tomim. He's called the Aderet, the Rabbi of Ponevezh. He's also part of Lithuania. And he married his daughter. Kook actually, his wife died in 1888. He married a second time. And his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, and his daughter, Reza Rivka, I think were from the second wife. So, Rav Kook was a rabbi in Boysk. 1904, he becomes a rabbi. He's invited to Yafo to be the rabbi of Palestine. was still under the British. It was actually not under the British. It's under the Ottoman Empire. He's asked to be the rabbi of Jaffa. World War I, Rav Kook leaves Israel to go to the conference of Agudat Israel. He gets stuck in Europe, and he spends his time and goes to Switzerland. From Switzerland, he's invited to London in 1916 to be the rabbi of the Machzikei Hadat synagogue, which was an immigrant Orthodox community in Spitalfields, London. And he stays there until 1919, when he's allowed to return to Israel. When he returns to Israel, he becomes the chief rabbi of Jerusalem in 1921. I want to mention two things, by the way, here. You know, the Balfour Declaration takes place when Rav Kook was in London. And the Balfour Declaration had quite a few opponents in the English Parliament, specifically from Jewish members, who were afraid that it would paint the Jews living in England as being those of dual loyalties. Because if you say that the British government is giving Palestine for the Jews, everybody's going to assume that the Jews now want to go to Palestine. So there was quite an opposition from some of the Jewish members of Parliament in England. Rabbi Kook, on the day of the Balfour Declaration, put an ad in the newspaper where he basically commended the British government for doing a historical move of allowing the Jews to go back to their land, and goes on and on about, you know, how meritorious it is and what a wonderful thing it is that the government is doing. And supposedly, according to the story, when one of the people who were against the Balfour Declaration in Parliament said something, another Parliament member said, well, what about this rabbi in London who just said it's the most wonderful thing that the British have ever done? So that was his small influence in the Balfour Declaration. Another interesting thing, he becomes the chief rabbi of Palestine in 1921. 1921 is when the Hebrew University was founded. And Rabbi Kook, as the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, comes to the inaugural session of the Hebrew University, which at that time was just the Faculty of Jewish Studies. It didn't have any other faculties at the time, and it was residing in what today is the law building on top of Mount Scopus. So Rav Kook gives a talk there about the importance of knowledge and sciences, and after he requests from the people that if they study Judaism, not to bring in Bible criticism. Well, that didn't happen. They definitely brought in Bible criticism, but it's just interesting that he had that. Yeah, today, if you don't teach Bible criticism, they won't take you into the faculty of the Bible department at 1921. Also, that same year, Rabbi Mordechai Alter of Gur, Ger Rebbe, comes to Palestine, and he meets Rav Kook. This is already under the British. And when he meets Rav Kook, so he's trying to figure out who this guy is, who so many people are criticizing him back in the old country, in Poland. They're walking through new parts of Jerusalem, and the Ger Rebbe says to Rav Kook, says, once upon a time, Jerusalem was a city of sages and saints. Look today, all these free thinkers who are hanging around the city. What a terrible thing. Rabbi Kook doesn't say anything. Then they get into a carriage which takes them towards the old city. As they're coming towards the old city, so they go by the valley of Hinnom, which today is the Sultan's Pool, near Jaffa Gate. The valley of Hinnom, which is mentioned in the book of Joshua, and it's called Gei Hinnom, Gei ben Hinnom, became a nickname for hell because in Jeremiah, this valley was called Gei HaTofet, the valley of the destruction, because the worship of the Molech, the idol of the Molech, took place in this valley where they would pass children over fire. So Jeremiah calls it Gei HaTofet, the valley of destruction. So as they're about to approach Jaffa Gate, they go by this valley. Rabbi Kook turns to the Rebbe of Gur. He says to him, once upon a time, our ancestors used to worship idols right in this valley. Thank God it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. So in his letters, in the Rebbe of Gur's letters, where he's writing to his Hasidim, there's a collection of his letters. So they have one letter about his trip to Palestine. And he says, and he's trying to address those who feel that Rabbi Kook went overboard protecting all these secular Jews. So the Rebbe of Gur says, it was his tremendous love of Israel which made him go overboard. In other words, he says, yeah, he went overboard, but if I have to teach merit, it's because of his love of the Jews that he did so. But Rav Kook was not a naive move. This was a very calculated move. There are many Jews in the parliament at the time, British Parliament. I don't know, but I'm sure there's a way of finding out. I don't know how many Jews, but there were Jewish members of parliament. I just don't know how many. Yeah. This same, if you want to call it inclusiveness, but it's more than inclusiveness. Rav Kook believes it's a mitzvah to love the Jewish people. Whether you agree with them or don't agree with them, they are your family. You don't have to agree with everybody in your family, but they are your family. So, it's not in so much of the sense as blood is thicker than water. It's not about that. Kabbalistically, it's because Rav Kook believes that every Jew has what they used to call in Yiddish, das Pinta L'Yid, that little spark of Jewishness, that if you just know how to light it, it'll bring them back. And remember, we've suffered a lot. We've gone through a lot of anti-Semitism, specifically in the 20th century after Rav Kook. So a lot of the ways, my humble opinion, the way Jews sometimes see Judaism is slightly pathological. It's, we'll get over it in a generation or two, but we're still in the shadow of the Shoah. And those who went through the Shoah and the children of those who went through the Shoah are a little bit damaged. It's not their fault. And that's the way I see things. And remember, everybody in this country, almost 85% of the Jews in our country now, came to Israel as refugees. They didn't come for ideological reasons. I'm not saying they're not Zionists. Maybe majority of them are, but that wasn't the reason they got here. In the 1930s, they were running away from Nazi Germany. After the war, they're running away from Europe, 500,000. Then in the late 50s, early 60s, they're running away from the Arab countries who basically kicked out all their Jews. And I forgot, in 56 to 58, 80,000 Jews were expelled from Poland under Gromyko, or the Polish communist leadership. And I just mentioned the 60s. In the 70s, you had Jews who left the former Soviet Union, about more than 100,000. Then you had, of course, in the Jews who left from Ethiopia, of course, in smaller numbers. I don't think they even reach 100,000, but also like refugees. And then you had, of course, the ones from the former Soviet Union, over 1 million. So put it all together, you realize that at least 85% of the Jews who came to Israel were refugees. Refugees have survival mentality. And so are their children. You just have to realize that. It explains so many things about Israel when you understand that. Survival mentality. I'll do anything to get ahead, but it's not personal. Right? That's it. God willing, it'll pass one day. But we have to realize that. We recognize it. And then, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, he went to visit Poland after Well, it was still communist towards the end of the communist period, or it was either towards the end or exactly with the fall of communism. I forget exactly when. And he did a concert there. And a lot of Jews from the Jewish community, there were still quite a few Jews at the time. Many left, of course, with the fall of communism to all different ways. Most left already in the years after the Shoah. Then a lot left in 1968 who were expelled. But then you had quite a few still. So he gave these concerts to the Jewish community. He sometimes said to them, Rabbi Karlbach, there are a lot of people don't want to come to Poland because what happened here? What is your feeling about this? Because you did come here. So Rabbi Karlbach says, look, I have a little heart. And in my heart, I can either love or I can hate. So I had to choose. I choose to love. So I'm here, and I want to share my music with the Jews and anybody else who comes, because you can't do both. You have to decide what side of the road you're on. So, Poland aside, for Rav Kook, the Jewish people you have to love. And sometimes when you have a child who's the most problematic, you have to love them even more. That's why Yitzchak loved Esav. It's not that he didn't understand who Esav was. He knew that Esav needed more attention. So that's what it means, Yitzchak ohevet et Yaakov. The one who needed more attention. Fast forward till about in the 1960s. Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the son of Rav Kook, was the Rosh Yeshiva at Merkaz Rav. It's called the Rabbi Kook's Universal Yeshiva. That's what he referred to as. And there's a student there, Rav Yochanan Fried, who later on worked in Jerusalem municipality, the desk of religious culture or something like that. I once heard a story from him. He was a young man, 20 years old at the yeshiva, maybe even younger. And because you get to the yeshiva at the age of 18. And there was some program where they asked two guys from the yeshiva to join a group of religious young people who would be meeting secular young people in some kibbutz. Okay, so he volunteered and somebody else, and Rabbi Tzvi said, this is a wonderful thing, off you go. Okay, so they went. So they went to the kibbutz, and people were asking questions, what about this, that, whatever. And then at the end of this program, so the one who is the master of ceremonies says to the secular group, what could you say that you have to learn from the religious young people sitting across? So each one came up with some idea what they thought they could learn from them. And then they asked the religious group what they thought that they could learn from the secular group. And they asked Rabbi Yochanan Fried, who was not a rabbi at the time, of course. It's a young man. Said, what do you have to learn? He said, nothing. We have the Torah. Okay. Goes back to the yeshiva, and Rav Tzvi calls him to the office. He says, can you tell me what happened? What happened? Said, oh, well, we had discussions about this, discussions about that. And then at the end, they asked, what can you learn from everybody? He says, did they ask you? He says, yeah, they did. What did you say? I said, nothing. We have the Torah. Tzvi said to him, you said to them nothing? You mean you have nothing to learn from these people? Nothing about learning, living in communal life, working the ground, working the land of Israel, love of the land of Israel, protecting the land of Israel? Nothing. You have nothing to learn from them, they think. He was like really, really upset. So this is really the same, and that's the way it's not just a question of inclusivity, it's a belief in the power of the Jewish people, no matter how they talk. I used to know I've been teaching many years at Bar-Ilan University. Many times when you have students who seem to be the ones who are like to ask the toughest questions, or let's say the most embarrassing type questions, those are the ones who are really interested. You might think they're doing it to spite you, but they're not. They really want to know what you're going to say. That has always been my experience. They just have to do it in a way that they don't get embarrassed, so they make it look like they're actually attacking you, but they're not. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. And welcome, Malki. Okay. So, okay. Rav Kook dies in 1935. At that time, he was the first chief rabbi of Palestine under the British. The next one, by the way, just after Rav Kook passes away, is Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog, the grandfather of our president at the moment, who was a rabbi in Ireland and then came to Israel. And they asked him to take the place of Rav Kook. And he's also the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel in 1948. He continues from 1936 till I think 1953 or something like that. He's the chief rabbi. Okay. About the writings of Rav Kook. Hillel Zeitlin was a rabbi who lived and perished during the Shoah in Europe. And he was a very prolific writer. He has a book that came out much later of his writings after his death. I think it's called Sifran Shel Yechidim. And there he talks about Rav Kook. And he says, it's not exactly that Rav Kook had a lot of new things to say. It's more that Rav Kook took the same Judaism that everybody else knew, but was able to see it from a completely different vantage point. So it's like everything was different. So, because he's looking at the same thing from a different vantage point. So everything comes out different. That was Hillel Zeitlin. Now, Rav Kook didn't publish books in his lifetime. He wrote lots of things. Most of his works are written like a personal philosophical diary. The Nazir, David Cohen, one of his closest disciples, he calls it almost like writings that were inspired from Ruach HaKodesh, from the Holy Spirit, almost like a prophetically written. But the point is that he writes ideas. Every time he has an idea, he would jot it down in his diaries and his notebooks. The collection of these notebooks came out much, much later. They're called the eight corpuses, Shmona Kvatzim. But originally they were published as separate books. One of the earliest books is called Orot HaTeshuva, Lights of Penitence. By the way, there's also Orot HaRi'iyah, Igrot HaRi'iyah, right? Ri'iyah, who's Ri'iyah? Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen is Ri'iyah. Ri'iyah means to see. Kook in Yiddish means to see. Cooking in Yiddish means to look. So that's why he liked the name Ri'iyah, to be able to look. And that's why all his books have to do with or, with light. Also, of course, the Kabbalists use the term light whenever they talk about secrets or godliness. They use the term light, God's light. So, in my humble opinion, I remember when I first tried to study Rav Kook, everybody told me, study Orot HaTeshuva, Lights of Penitence. I figured, okay, that's easier. So I had a friend, we studied it together. That time I was about 16 or 17. He was already 21, so he was in yeshiva. He showed me how to do it. Okay. Then I realized years later that Orot HaTeshuva, in a sense, is an introduction to Rav Kook's understanding of Judaism. It just took me a long time to figure that out. And I want to show you that to you today. I want to go with you only through the introduction of Orot HaTeshuva and possibly chapter 1 to show you how the concept of penitence from the word teshuva, which means to return, and Rav Kook sees this as the idea of returning. For Rav Kook, this is the basis of everything. It's really quite quite something. And this is one of the things I want to point out. By the way, today Orot HaTshuva has about 18 chapters. The original Orot HaTshuva, the first 3 chapters were written as an article that Rav Kook published in this journal that he was hoping would start becoming popular, but it did not. But he did publish it. The first 3 chapters for sure, possibly even the 4th, I have to check, but definitely the first 3 chapters. And you can see right away the first 3 chapters are 100% connected to each other, as opposed to some of the other chapters in the book. And even chapter 4 looks like a continuation. That's why I don't remember if 4 was from the original writing or not. But after chapter 4, it's a direct continuation. So once you hit chapter 4 and you finish chapter 4, you can already start understanding what the whole book is about. Okay, so without further ado, let me open this up. I want to mention also the Midrash Rabbah says 7 things were created before God created 7 things before he created the world. And what were the 7 things? I can remember them all. One was the name of the forefathers, meaning the idea of the forefathers. Another one was the temple. Another one was the name of the Messiah. Another one was the Torah. Another one was the idea of the Jewish people. Another one was Kisei HaKavod, his holy throne. Okay, what's number 7? I have to remember. Number 7, it'll come to me. But Rabbi Akiva adds even tshuva. Rabbi Akiva adds tshuva also was created before the universe was created. Now, what does this mean, by the way? Why does God have to create certain things before there's a universe? When you say that something is created before the universe, it means that it is the goal. It's like when I want to build a house. Before I build the house, I have to have an idea of what I want the house for. What am I going to do in that house? If I don't know what I need the house for, I'm not going to build it. So when you say that God had created 7 things before the universe, it means he had in mind 7 things that were really important in this universe. He wanted people like the patriarchs, individuals who would look for God. He wanted a Jewish people, a collective people who would imitatio Dei, who would try to bring godliness into this world as an example for all the nations. He wanted a temple, which is a connection between man and God. Vasuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham. They shall build for me a temple, and I will dwell among them. He wanted kisei hakavod, God's majesty, which means the ability of God to dwell in this world. And as Menachem Mendel of Kotsk once said, or Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, when they asked him, where is God? So he said, the answer is God is anywhere human beings are allowed to let him, are allowing him in. That's where God dwells. Wherever human beings allow him in. So the temple, the kisei hakavod, the avot, the Torah as an instruction pamphlet for the Jewish people to set the tone of what it means that a collective people walks in the way of God. And then we become the maestro. Not everybody has to become Jewish, but they can learn certain things from us. Yorenu midrachav, it says in Yeshayahu chapter 2, when it says the nations shall come up to the house of Jacob, let him teach us from his ways. Midrash says from his ways, not necessarily all his ways. Those who want all his ways, they convert. The rest, they want some of the ways. They want to be influenced. They want to be inspired. So it's interesting, and there's an interesting question. The Midrash says, what came first out of the 7? Which one came first? This is also a concept which I heard from Rabbi Sherki, who heard a discussion about this from Manitou, from Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi. The Midrash says, what came first? Was it The idea of the Jewish people or the Torah? Finally, the Midrash says, well, it must have been the idea of the Jewish people, because it says in the Torah, speak to the Jewish people. So it says in the Torah, speak to the Jewish people. There must have been an idea of the Jewish people before the Torah was written. So the way Rabbi Sharkey used to explain this, and I think it's 100% correct. When the question of what came first, the Jewish people or the Torah, seems like a mute question. What does it matter? It matters in the sense of what is your religious disposition or religious consciousness. How do you see Judaism? Is Judaism that God wanted to give the Torah to the world, and he needed somebody to keep the Torah, therefore he found the Jews? Or did God want for there to be a Jewish people, and he gave them the Torah in order to teach them how to be the best they can be? It sounds like a slight difference, but can be very vast at times. In other words, is the goal the giving of the Torah? Or is the goal the Jewish people, and God enhances them with the Torah so they can be an example to all how to live according to the laws of God? What's the difference? Well, if God just wants there to be a Torah and the Jewish people don't follow it, might as well find a different people. Remember when the Jewish people are at the sin of the golden calf, and God says to Moshe, Heref mimeni vashmidem v'seotcha legoy gadol, as it's written in Devarim. Midrash says, leave me alone, and I will destroy this people, and I will make you, Moses, into a great people. Moses says, sorry, that's the plan. Take me out of the book. I'm not interested. So, and that's what God, according to the Midrash, God was waiting for that answer. Because what does God say? He says, Heref mimeni vashmidem, as if, leave me alone and let me do this. The Midrash says, leave me alone. But Moshe is holding God to prevent him. What does it mean, leave me alone? The Midrash says, this can be compared to a king who has a son, and he loves the son, but the son was really mischievous. And the king wants to strike the son, but he's not sure if he should. And he has a friend standing at the door. So he says, let nobody stop me from hitting you right now. And then the man runs over and says, no, don't do that. So God, when he's talking to Moshe, he says, let me do it. Don't hold me back, because I'm going to do this. He's waiting for Moshe to say, stop. And that's what the leader is supposed to do. They're supposed to defend the Jews. And believe me, for Moshe, it was not an easy thing to do, because he knew about the sin of the golden calf. But he knew what his job was. So if you think that the Torah is the main thing, it's not about the people, right? Let me give you another example. I don't know if you remember years ago, it's really been a long time, probably since the 80s, where in certain religious neighborhoods, they used to throw stones on Shabbat on cars that came to the area. Today, they stopped. Also because maybe those cars don't come to the area anymore, but stopped. Okay. Now, I always say, what does it mean to throw a stone at a car on Shabbat? That means that in your mind, God gave the Torah, and the Torah says Jews have to keep the Sabbath. That guy's Jewish. I have to stop him from breaking the Torah because God wants the Torah to happen. So I must throw that stone. I must do anything to stop him from breaking Shabbat. That's the mindset of somebody who thinks the Torah came first, that was the major goal. But what if I think that the idea of the Jewish people came first, that's the main goal, and the Torah is just the means to the Jewish people becoming a godly people, Mamlechet Kohanim, a Goy Kadosh, a priestly nation and a holy nation? Well, if I see somebody riding on Shabbat, I'm going to think, you know what? I'm going to find out who he is and talk to him when Shabbat's over. Because look, if you throw stones, he's going to do it happily next week too, just to spite you. But if you talk to the guy, he might get it. There's a story of Rabbi Aryeh Levine, famous rabbi in Jerusalem, and also a colleague of Rav Kook and a friend. So Aryeh Levine used to walk around on Friday afternoons before Shabbat, see people. And there's one story, he bumps into this guy, tall fellow who wasn't wearing his kippah, and he was very embarrassed. He said, Rabbi Levine, I'm sorry, mostly I do wear my kippah just today. Levine says, look, I'm a short guy. I can't even see the top of your head. So it doesn't really matter. Another time, Rabbi Levine was walking. He used to see shop owners who kept their shops open on Shabbat. So he sees one shop owner with a shop open on Shabbat. Didn't feel good about it. So took a chair. He sat next to the entrance. Shop owner sees him sitting next to the entrance. Doesn't know what's going on. Rabbi Levine doesn't say anything. Okay, Shabbat is almost coming in. Shop owner looks at Rabbi Levine. Rabbi Levine looks back at him. He says, I know it's difficult to make a living. I know. That's it. Shop owner gets the idea, closes the shop, and walks with them. If you don't criticize people, they look at it differently. When you criticize people, they will do things to spite you. When you don't, if you actually like somebody, it's really hard for them to hate you. It's just difficult, I'd love to hate this guy, but unfortunately, he seems to like me. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to point this out. In Tana Devei Eliyahu, which is also a midrash, which is somehow connected to Elijah, he also, in the last chapter there, he says, I have two loves. One of them is the Torah, and one of them is the Jewish people. There are those who say the Torah comes first, and there are those who say the Jewish people come first. But I say the Jewish people come first. So, also in Tana Devei Eliyahu, it's the same idea, how to approach people, how to see people. Rabbi Kook used to say, it says in Pirkei Avot, Havemi Talmidav Shel Aharon, be a disciple of Aaron. Ohev Shalom, who loves peace. Rodev Shalom, who actively pursues peace. Ohevet Abriot, who loves people. Umekarvan la Torah, and brings them closer to Torah. Rabbi Tzvi Kook once said, there are those who think that it means to love people in order to bring them back to the Torah, as a means to an end. Said, no, that's not what it means. It says, love people. When you love people, you also want to share with them ideas that you think are relevant. But it's not one in order for another. It's not a trick. Ohevet abriot, umekarvan laTorah. Let's now read Rav Kook. Should be over here. Okay, how are you going to see this? This translation is taken from Boxer's book. See in Boxer? It's a penitence or teshuva. This is the introduction Rav Kook wrote. For a long time now, an inner struggle goes on in me. I feel prodded by a mighty force to speak about teshuva. All my thoughts are focused on this theme alone. Teshuva holds a primary place in the teachings of the Torah and in life. It's very interesting. All the hopes of the individual and of society depend on it. Right away, you get the feeling he's talking about something else. But let me continue. It embodies a divine commandment that the Ramban says, when it says on the Torah, that this mitzvah is not far away from you. It's not on the other side of the ocean. It's not in the heavens that you have to bring him down. It's close to you in your mouth and in your heart to do. So most people explain it's talking about the Torah. Nachmandi says it's the mitzvah of teshuva, which is mentioned in chapter 30 in Devarim. So according to Ramban, teshuva itself is a mitzvah. Now the mitzvah of teshuva, it's an easy one to carry out, because since a stirring of the heart towards penitence is a valid expression of penitence. In other words, if you think about teshuva, you've done teshuva already. If you think, you know what, that was wrong, I'm not going to do it again. That's it. Even in your mind, it's enough. Maimonides says you also have to do vidui, confession, but not everybody agrees with that. The Talmud is not clear that we do confession anyhow in Yom Kippur, but according to Nachmanides, the main thing is to think, I want to change. So it's literally, it seems to be a simple thing to do on the one hand. On the other hand, it's the most difficult to perform. So since it has not yet been effectuated fully in the world and in life. It has not come to fruition in the world. Again, you might wonder, like, what does that mean? What is supposed to come to fruition in teshuva? Let me continue. I find myself constantly needing to think and to speak about this subject. A good deal has been written on this subject in the Torah, in the prophets, the writings of our sages. For our generation, which is a key word here, the subject is still a closed book, needs clarification. A literature which explores every area there is manifest, the poetry of life, did not probe into this wonderful treasure of life. It's not our literature, it means literature. I remember the Hebrew. It says literature, which explores the poetry of life, not probed into this issue, wonderful treasure of life, treasure of penitence. Indeed, it's not even begun to take any interest in it, discover its character and value, not even from its poetic side, which is a source of endless inspiration. If we're just talking about teshuvas of penitence, maybe it has a little bit. I mean, you have Dostoevsky, right? What's the name of that book? The brothers, that fellow who kills his apartment owner and can't deal with the not deal with the Nikki Foot Matzpun, his guilty conscience. Anyhow, but he says that literature has not really penetrated into this. It certainly has thus far failed to touch its practical aspect. Of course, it's not interested in the practical aspect, especially insofar as it bears to the condition of our modern life. My inner being impels me to speak about penitence, teshuva. I recoil from my intention. Am I worthy to discuss this subject? The giants of past generations wrote on the subject of teshuva. Even the prophets, the noblest of the sages, the greatest of the saints, how dare I place myself in their category? Nothing will hold me back. Nothing will relieve me of this inner claim. I must speak about penitence, particularly about its literary and practical aspects, to understand its significance for our generation and the manner of its implementation in life, and the life of the individual, and the life of society. That's his introduction. That is his introduction. So, I think I need to explain the introduction. Even if I don't go to chapter 1. Let me do it like this. Take this for a moment. I'm going to open up a new one, not this one. I could use this one too. I'll use this one and just hold it. I have another double. Okay. Should be fine. Okay. Let's do this in English. And we'll make it go from. Wait, I have to close this for a moment. I'm sorry. Right here. Okay. You remember, but Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, his interpretation of Genesis chapter 1, where the first day of creation, according to the Midrash, God creates light, and the light that is created on the first day, according to the Midrash, is an unusual light. That a person could look into this light and gaze from one side of the universe to the other. It's not clear that the Midrash is talking about physics. So this is mentioned in the Midrash Rabbah. It's also mentioned in Hagiga, in the Talmud. And Ramchal explains, what does it mean that the light on the first day was this unusual light? And it says, the Midrash continues and says, God took away this light because he felt that the world was not worthy for such a light. And he put it away for the righteous in the future times. And instead, we have on day 4, sun, moon, and the stars. That's the way the Midrash interprets why there's light twice in the Genesis story. So Ramchal explains that this is a metaphor. The light that you can see from one side of the world to another represents a perfect universe. The perfect God creates a perfect universe. However, God knows that you cannot put human beings into a perfect universe. What are they going to do there? Human beings are imperfect. So for one, they actually are, it's not appropriate to put them in a perfect universe. You know, there's a story about in the Talmud of a fellow who went to live in a town called Good, Tov. It was a town called Good. Everybody was good. Everybody did the right thing. Nobody ever lied, whatever. One time, by mistake, he told a lie. They had to kick him out. So, anyhow, so human beings are not, it's hard for them to adapt in a perfect world. So they get an imperfect world. Besides, if they have an imperfect world, they have what to do to perfect it. When you have something to do, then I become accomplished. I feel like I did something. You know, you take a 5-year-old child to the supermarket and you're taking all these luggage, all this baggage with you from the supermarket. It says, maybe I can help out. Yeah, what can he do? He can't hold the bag. Okay, so you give him a little confiture to hold. He's doing something. Okay, something like that. God has a universe. He puts Adam and Eve in Gan Eden in order to work the garden, Lovda Lushomra, to work and to watch over the garden. So they feel that they have something to do. He leaves them something to do. But anyhow, day 1 is this perfect universe. Day 2, the Rakia, which is the firmament between the waters, already represents this break between a perfect universe and a non-perfect universe. So this first break takes place already on day 2. In other words, you have here day 1 represents the perfect universe. Okay? Day 2 is the partition between a perfect world and a non-perfect world, which means not a partition, but partition. It's already on down a level. Now we have the imperfect world. The imperfect world is already waiting for human beings to join. They join on day 6. But they enter an imperfect world. When Adam and Eve are told not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then they do, and they sin against God's, they had one command, and they had to break it. That was it. One mitzvah. They had to break it. They say that in the United States, when they invented cars, so at the beginning, there were only 2 cars in the United States and they had a crash. That's just the way it works, right? So there was only one mitzvah, they had to break it. All the trees they could have eaten, the one that you said not to, but that's human nature. It's always the one that we can't, that we want. So, but this is already, the world already went down, but it was nobody's fault. It was God's decision that human beings need an imperfect world. So the world is already imperfect before Adam and Eve are created. It's imperfect because it has to be suitable to human beings. So then why do you need a perfect world? Because the perfect God creates a perfect world. There's no other way to do it. But then you take it down another peg, it becomes imperfect. It's this idea of emanations, of madregot, of levels. So after Adam and Eve, day 6, we mentioned this, we talked about the redemption. So they eat from the tree, which means basically they're not suited for the Garden of Eden. And as the Ari writes, God knew that in advance. However, and also Ramchal writes like this, even though God knows that they're going to eat from the tree, He cannot push them down into the next level without it being their fault. So He knows in advance what they're going to do, but it has to be their decision. So He puts them there. Theoretically, they did not have to eat from the tree. De facto, God knows that they're going to eat from the tree. And God says to them, okay, now you have to leave the Garden of Eden. You're now in a different world. It's called the world of history. Rav Kook likes writing history in Hebrew like this. Historia. What happened? I don't know what just happened here. I don't know what happened. 1 second. Something happened. A moment. You can see I'm not an expert at computers. So let me do this again. Thing happened. I don't know what happened. Let me find this again. According to Rav Kook, you have history. He writes in Hebrew. Historia, the tav. Historia is the word seter ya, which means God is concealed. The world of history, the 6,000 years of history, is God is concealed. Or hysteria, right? God is concealed. So we had, as I said, we had the first day, which was light. It's called the perfect world. And then we have the second day, which is the partition, division. So I'm doing it in Hebrew without it, not in English. Happens also. And day 2 is the division. Now, already from day 2 until day 6, it's already the second level. In day 6, it goes down again. And this is the third level. Again, you have a perfect world, the world of Gan Eden, and then our world. There are 3 levels. Perfect world, if you want to call it God's world, but it's not God, it's God's world. But unfortunately, it's not ready for human beings yet. The next one is called Gan Eden, the imperfect world, which according to Ramchal is actually still a spiritual world. It's not yet 100% physical. That's why it says that God created for them kotnot or, which means clothing of leather, or a coat of leather. And it says in the Torah of Rabbi Meir, instead of or with an ayin, it was written with an aleph, which means coats of light. They were still in a level, an angelic level, if you want to put it that way. And then you have the world of history, where God is hidden, which is our world. So you have these three levels. For Rav Kook, teshuva is penitence, is not penitence, it's return. There are four levels of returning. There's the individual level, where I want to be a better person. And a better person means to connect to myself and to my soul. As the Hasidim always say, that we are a soul within a body. And that's just the way it is. You can't pretend you're just a soul. And the Torah tells us not to pretend we're just a body. But where your mind is where you are. If you think about holy things, you're in holiness. If you think about material things, you're in the material. Wherever your mind is, that's where you are. So even though you live in this world, your mind can be in holy thoughts. They call that inwelt, oiswelt, being in the world and out of the world simultaneously. There's a story like that of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman tells a story about a king who his wise men told him that they can see in the stars in astrology that anybody who eats the wheat from next year is going to go crazy. So the king starts thinking, well, okay, so what do we do? So then they say, well, what we can do is we can take the wheat that we have from this year and put it into storage, and we'll eat the wheat from next year. So at least we won't be crazy, even if everybody else is. King says, wait a second, that's not a good idea. Because if everybody's crazy and we're not, they're going to think that we're crazy and they're not. So that doesn't work. So I need a better idea. So then the sages say, okay, we have a better idea then. We'll put a mark on our foreheads. But next year we'll also eat the wheat. But when we see the mark on our foreheads, it will remind us that we're crazy. So at least we'll know that we're crazy, but nobody else will. The meaning of this story is exactly what I just said. We live in a world where all the goals are material. People judge people by the size of their house, by how much their car costs, by what they own, by what position of power, etc. they have. But in the end, after 120, you can't take it with you. As it says in the Psalms, you cannot take things with you in your death. Everything you've gathered will not come after you. But what do you take with you? You take with you your good deeds, how you transform yourself into a better person, your ideas, the things that you did in this world, the things that you did to transform this world. These are the eternal parts of the human being. But when we're in the world, it's hard for us to think that way. So Nachman says, you can't break yourself out of the world. You are in a material world. But if you have that sign on your forehead, which means if you remind yourself that there are a lot of fake things in the world, you'll remember that the eternal things are things you have to concentrate on. As I said in my article, as my father said, you have things which are urgent and things that are important. Things that are urgent are necessities. Food, clothing, housing, good job. These are necessities of life, of course, not even a question. The Talmud says that Rava, famous Rosh Yeshiva in Babylonia, used to say to his students, who were all agriculturalists, I don't want to see you in the month of Tishrei when you're planting, or I think it's Elul when you're planting, and the month of Tishrei, and in Nisan, in Nisan when you're planting, I think it was, and in Elul when you're reaping. Because if you don't do that work in those 2 months, you won't have any time the whole year to study Torah. So those 2 months, which are the main months for agriculture, do whatever you have to do. Don't show up to the study house, right? So obviously, people need the urgent things in life. But in the end of the day, we need time for the important things. And the important things are how we make ourselves a better human being, how we educate ourselves, how we teach ourselves morality, how to implement these things in this world, looking on a spiritual path. Years ago, I met somebody from London who was here in Israel, and they wanted to convert. They were actually born in Russia. It's a very interesting story because this was a woman whose brother was a religious Jew studying in yeshiva. And she wanted to convert to Judaism. So you're wondering how that is? It was her half-brother, meaning they had the same father but not the same mother. Her father had remarried a Jewish woman, and this boy took an interest in Judaism, was studying in yeshiva in Telstone. And she was very taken by this. She wanted to convert. So she came to Israel to convert. And I remember that was the time that Richard Dawkins had come out with his book, Attacking Religion. And what was his name? Hitchens, I forget his first name, also wrote his book, Attacking Religion. So it's interesting. You come from England. There were 2 serious books, attacks on religion, that just came out in the last couple of years. And here you are trying to embrace Judaism. How do you react to that? She said to me, people like Richard Dawkins don't understand what a spiritual journey is. I'll never forget that. I think that was the best answer I ever heard. It's like a different mindset. It's a whole different mindset of what human being is. So for Rav Kook, there are 4 levels of teshuva, and it's all about return. Since God created human being yashar, which means good. This is in Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Elohim asat adam yashar, vehema bikshu chishbonot rabim. God created man straight. But human beings, they look for all different types of accounts. So we ruin it. Children, for instance, until you ruin it, they do everything right. They want to do the right thing unless their parents, or they go through a hard time and they get destroyed. Then it takes years and years. So teshuva means bringing yourself back to what your soul wants. It's not penitence in the sense of, okay, I'm guilty, sorry, that's also true. But teshuva means making yourself who you really are supposed to be. So it's a movement of returning to your inner self, who you were not maybe even aware of. Your consciousness was focused on material, and now your consciousness is moving inwards towards your soul, which is basically a more complete you. That's the act of return. The Torah is the guideline how to do that movement. That's on the individual level. On the collective level, when the Jewish people come back to the land of Israel, that is collective national teshuva. We were scattered among the nations, and we realized that's not our place. And besides, they don't like us. So obviously, it's not our place. Yeah, we got the hint. So, Jews happened to be expelled out of Spain in 1492, out of Portugal in 1497, out of France in 1381, out of Germany, I missed York, England in 1291. We didn't do so well in many countries. They didn't like us. When we come back to the land of Israel, we're just trying to be what a nation is supposed to be, a nation in its land, the land that God promised us. He said, there, the Torah is going to work better. It's an act of teshuva. We were prevented from doing it for generations. Now we have the possibility. The return to the land is an act of collective national teshuva. That's number 2 on the national level. Then there's the world, international level. What many Jews like calling tikkun letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. We say in Aleinu l'shabeach. The world has to do teshuva. The world has to do teshuva by really caring about those who don't have, and not just doing it to see their name in the paper, or by really trying to solve issues of sicknesses, even if some company is not going to make hundreds of billions of dollars. Okay, this is real teshuva, that getting the world correct. There is a plan of teshuva of the whole world, where the world, the leadership, which affects the people, has to get the plan right. It's not just about the Jews. When God says to Moshe, I'm sending 10 plagues, Moshe wonders, why 10 plagues? Let's just go. Hashem says to Moshe, V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. I want the Egyptians to know that I'm God, not just the Israelites. There's also a universal platform here. When our Jews get their act together, then the rest of the world will understand also, because the whole world is a reflection of the Jewish people back and forth. We reflect what happens in the world reflects what happens in us. So we have a certain responsibility to get our act together. Because the rest of the world, one of the reasons it has a double standard about Jews is because they really do know that we were there to bring the Bible to the world. Okay, so they expect certain things of us, and if we don't do it, they'll make fun of us. Rabbi Sachs always said, non-Jews like Jews who like Judaism. They're not so crazy about Jews who don't, because it's self-respect. It's something everybody knows, that you're brought to the universe, you're brought to this world. So you have the individual teshuva, what a person does with himself. You have collective teshuva, national teshuva, putting together the Jewish society according to Parashat Mishpatim, a society based on justice in the land of Israel. Then you have international teshuva. And for the first time in 2,000 years, the Jews can actually have an effect on the international arena too, as a country. Those are the three levels. And when that happens, then the world itself starts moving up from day 6 to day 1. That happens by itself. So those are the 4 levels of teshuva, according to Rav Kook, and we'll see it in this Orot HaTeshuva, but I've spoken a lot already, and I'd like to thank everybody, and if you have any questions, b'vakasha.